So first of all, welcome and thank you for spending time. My name is Dr. Kaustubh Nande. I am part of the organizing team, helping out on some of the aspects, and I have the pleasure of hosting this track today along with our distinguished speakers. I heard Ankit and Subbu in the first two talks, and obviously we'll continue that train of thought and the dialogue as we hear more on this panel. So, without further ado, I want to introduce the moderator, and then the moderator will introduce the rest of the speakers. And of course, I'll introduce the panel in short as well. So I first want to introduce Mr. Malay Shah. He's the Senior Director at Alvarez and Marshall. It's a consulting firm. He brings in 17 years of experience in global management consulting, transaction advisory, and in strategy and planning. His primary areas of concentration are around the go-to-market strategy, cost optimization, and of course, the topic of the day, digital transformation. Malay has spent 3 years in the industry, leading the central planning for a large $6 billion company, and he was also responsible for corporate strategy and in leading the business unit performance in management and supply chain transformation programs in his role. So, Malay, welcome to IoT Next. I just want to read out the quick names and titles of the next four panelists. So we have Nishit Rastogi, founder of Locus. We have Navneet Kapoor, MD of Maersk. I would like you to please take the stage as I read out the names. We have Anish Basu Roy, founder of Shotang. And I just learned an avid CrossFit fan. And also we have Mohit Mehrotra, Managing Director, Omnicom India. So, Malay, the stage is yours. Audience, please enjoy the panel. If you have questions, I have one small request. Please be as specific as possible in directing your questions. And do introduce who you are so the rest of the audience can know some context as well as the panelists. So Malay, over to you. A big round of applause after a lot of coffee.
Thank you so much, Costa. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and I hope this is a much better session to have where you are caffeinated enough rather than having a session right after lunch. So I hope this will be an interesting one for you as well. We have quite a bit of diverse panel, as Dr. Costa introduced some of the panel members, we will obviously hear stories from each of them in terms of the business that they're driving, the specific the business problem that they're trying to solve, and they all come from varied industry backgrounds. And I think this is also in some sense a need for the day as well, because as we look at transportation and logistics as an industry, there are massive problems that needs to be solved, right? I mean, we are as opposed to developed countries which are trying to solve, the last 5% and optimize the last 5%, of the problem. Here we have lots of challenges, whether it's in terms of, driver availability, if you're looking at the road transportation, or whether you're looking at multimodal logistics, from shipping and road and rail rack availability. To looking at, the infrastructure. I mean, we are still struggling, as a country quite a lot in terms of the infrastructure, although that's improving significantly on a day-by-day, day-to-day basis. On the other hand, we have a generation of consumer, or rather generation of consumers who are very demanding, right? I mean, we all want next day shipping. We want overnight shipping. So I think the expectations that we as consumers have actually increased rather than reduced, right? And at the same time, overall the industry is facing challenges, and that's where the IoT has a role to play. And when I talk about IoT, obviously you will have heard certain definitions earlier, but in the context of this conversation, I'll use IoT a little more. In a broader sense. We'll obviously talking about the sensors, but we are also talking about all the associated technologies in terms of looking at all the data, integrating the data, making sense out of it, analyzing the data, and at the end of the day creating a service, right? At the end of the day we are all now used to, the Ubers and Olas as a service model, and as a consumer, we are looking at, those kind of service. So we'll talk about, how all these elements fits in together, and also talk about, what kind of, mega problems that the industry is facing, and the mega problems, that the technology can really solve. And hear the stories from each of the distinguished gentlemen over here. You heard we have, folks from an enterprise business, which is, as large as $64 billion is what the Maersk, $40 billion. So still a massive organization, which will, and when we'll hear from Navneet in terms of the, the massive size and scale at which they operate, the millions of containers all around the world, managing consignments, managing ships, vessels, managing tankers, practically on a real-time basis, right? On the other hand, we also have Mohit, that you heard, who comes from Omnicom, which is a IoT-based company which specifically focuses on fuel and solving, all the business problems around fuel, and whether those fuel problems are in road transportation or in even the airline transportation, and so on and so forth. And then we have two gentlemen, who are, who have built and grown companies right here, in Bangalore, right? And we are all proud of seeing companies in Bangalore solving, again, mega problems. I mean, obviously, the first is, trying to solve mega problems not only for the India, but potentially taking those use cases even outside of India as well. So we have Mohit and Nishit, who have found, Nishit and Anish, who have found respectively companies such as Locus and Shotang, and we'll hear from them as well. So what I'll do is I'll open the forum over here. I think it will be very helpful for each one of you, maybe to talk about your story, talk about, the use case or the problem that you have solved, how technology played a role in solving that problem. And I think that's how we'll start off with. We'll then focus obviously on the challenges, on the opportunities which are available, and then see if we can, get a convergent viewpoint, from a very divergent set of stakeholders that we have over here. So with that, I'll open up the forum. I'll ask maybe Nishit to go first, and maybe just talk about your story from a Locus perspective and the problem that you're trying to solve.
Hi, I'm Nishit. I work at Locus. We're basically a team of PhDs and ex-AWS engineers who have no background in logistics whatsoever. And neither do our families or our parents, right? And that's the interesting part today about logistics, transport, and movement, that it's effectively a mathematical problem, right? And with all the IoT, like during the course of this conversation, my company will probably collect about 400,000 new data points, right? Now, what we do, so like IoT is generating more data than teenagers do on Instagram, right? It's a fact. I'm not kidding. As a fact, IoT generates per second more data, and I assure you, it's a significant amount of photos that get uploaded on Instagram, right? So what we do is we try and make sense out of this data. We're a specialized engineering and research firm. Right now, the three problems we attack in supply chain are network, load, and route optimization. Whenever any one of you buy anything from Big Basket, Urban Ladder, or if it gets shipped via Gati, Blue Dart, you're basically receiving a package that has been routed and scheduled on Locus. We work with later stage startups and large enterprises, bringing them even on EBITDA positive public companies, double-digit movement in their freight costs. Thank you.
Thanks, Nishit.
Okay. Hi, I'm Navneet. I also don't have a long history with logistics. I represent a company called Maersk. It's the world's largest shipping and logistics business. I joined the company just a few months ago. But it's one of those interesting companies where the use case for IoT is massive, and it has been deployed at scale as well. The opportunity, of course, is what do we do with that, and how do we make sense of it to drive greater value for our customers and business. But let me talk a little bit about the business and how IoT is already playing a role there. So as I said, Maersk, world's largest shipping and logistics business operates about 600 large ships as one of its business streams across over 300 ports, and ships millions of containers around the world across 121 countries. So fairly complex business, and it ships all sorts of stuff, right, from large cars to clothing to food that perishables. So we need to account for all of that, and it takes several weeks for stuff to move from one part of the world to the other, if not longer. And often, especially the perishable items go in what are called refrigerated containers or reefers. And if you don't maintain the temperature, power, humidity appropriately, you'll have a lot of damaged products and claims and other challenges. So about 5 years ago, Maersk decided to invest in what's called today the remote container maintenance or management program, and we invested in putting sensors across these containers. About 500,000 of them are reefers or refrigerated containers, and it took us almost 3 years to put those sensors in. And since then, we've been collecting data, about 80 variables collected every hour. So it's billions of records that now suddenly are in the system. But what it has allowed us to do is to be able to track, the problems with, for example, power supply for one of the reefers, and then do something about it. So we have a team in Chennai that maintains or tracks these problems 24/7, and then connects back with the captains of those ships to do something about those problems. So apart from reducing damage, it has had many other positive implications, such as reducing inspection time, which could be in the past be several hours before each vessel takes off, to now minutes, because you're doing it by exception. This also allows us to play into several other exciting use cases for the future around, for example, network optimization, looking at empty container optimization, and we'll talk more about it as we go along. But I just wanted to share that there is a very, very large, because the title of the or the theme of this conference is beyond the hype. So this is clearly beyond the hype. What we do with it is really the challenge ahead. So, thank you.
Appreciate, Navneet, and I think we'll switch gears a little bit from enterprise to even the consumer businesses as well. So maybe Anish, if you can talk.
Hi, I am Anish, and in keeping with the spirit of the group, I also don't have a background in logistics, so I chose not to betray the group there. But what I do have a background is a lot of retail, a lot of sales, distribution. I spent more than a decade working with companies like Coke and then Nokia across the length and breadth of the country in various distribution oriented assignments. I think except for Bihar and Gujarat, I've worked in every single state in the country. While doing so, in a way, the seed for founding the company that I run today was planted. Shotang was essentially born out of the experience that we accumulated about retail, sales, distribution, last mile logistics. Shotang is the country's leading retail distribution platform, which solves, to our mind, one of the largest, most massive and complex India-specific problems. Right? Traditional retailers, and potentially millions of them at some point in time, they procure inventory on an e-commerce platform like ours. So a few years back, while we saw the entire country kind of being taken by storm by the consumer e-commerce revolution, so to say, I think what hit us was the fact that e-commerce and related technology could perhaps benefit these traditional retailers way more than it potentially benefits consumers. And to our mind, India very clearly is a retailer's country, where retail contributes to about 40% of the country's GDP, ends up employing about 10% of the country's population. Making these micro small businesses is something that keeps us awake in the night and keeps driving us. Um, while I said a little earlier, we do not have much of a background in logistics, but with intense degree of pride, we can say that we've solved some of the most complex last mile logistics problems for all these micro small businesses. Uh, we ship thousands of products every single day to these retailers within 24 hours, which actually helps them make their working capital that much more efficient, be able to serve consumers that they sell to far more efficiently at any given point in time. And of course, it helps manufacturers, large as well as small, to reach out to these rather digitally disconnected, underserved retailers at the click of a button, right? All of this rides on top of one of the finest and best in class logistics technology frameworks and infrastructure that we've kind of built out, right? So yeah, that's a little bit about our story at Showtime.
Thank you. So I would obviously not like to betray the group. Yes, I've been at Omnicom for about a year. I come with background in smart city and used to work with Cisco for a couple of years and then started off my career with distribution. But what we are doing here at Omnicom very interestingly is that Omnicom, by looking at a lot of the discussion that we are having in the back room, was that it's solving a point problem for the logistics industry. And it's a big point problem. It's a problem of fuel and the fuel supply chain. Fuel accounts for almost 60% in many cases of the operating expense of any logistics operator. And traditionally, there have not been good enough technologies to manage and monitor fuel in a credible way. And about 15 years back, Omnicom solved that problem. We are a East European IoT firm. We make a particular brand of a particular category of sensors that goes inside any kind of fuel dump, and it monitors fuel and it communicates that back to the platform, our platform, or any other platform that logistics or other retail or organization might have. And by doing that, our customers tell us that they have started to get transparency and visibility into their single largest operating expense. Um, it's not that, and I thought it's not that everybody is, while everybody wants the solution, there is a huge set of impediments that we are facing in terms of building a totally new category of logistics, telematics, so to say. And primarily because fuel is so, it's now culturally, the pilferage of fuel is now so culturally acceptable as a practice within our industry, and not just our industry in India, but worldwide, that a big part of the problem that I solve or my company solves is actually giving them the accurate read on what you can do with it, and then working with them to change the culture of operation, and a huge set of problems in that space. I have, but I have use cases where some of our more newer logistics operators, people who've got fairly large fleets of over 2,000 to 3,000 trucks, and have started to deploy these sensors and these platforms on their fleet, are able to now get a complete read on their daily fuel consumption. And we've got confirmation from some of our large customers that they've actually managed to shave off about 5%, upwards of 5% of their operating expenses by using some of our technologies. So we'll talk more about how we do it, but of course, this is a specific problem that we are trying to solve in the logistics space.
Sure. No, but thanks, Mohit. Appreciate that viewpoint as well. So what you heard over here is, Omnicom trying to solve a problem, in terms of the fuel pilferage, whether it's in India or across the world. You heard from Anish how they are trying to enable hundreds of thousands of retailers in a country like India, which is probably the only country which is having such a large network of retailers. Who have to be enabled from variety of perspectives. You obviously heard from Navneet about how they are trying to solve a problem at a scale in terms of measuring, monitoring, the quality of goods, especially being transported in a refrigerated manner, and a lot of those are perishable goods, and obviously from Nishit in terms of leveraging the data which comes out of the entire IoT sensors in terms of making smart, automated, intelligent decisions. So very very diverse set of problems which are to be solved, and this is probably just a very small portion in terms of all the problems which are out there in the industry to be solved. But let me go back to Mohit, because Mohit, what you are solving is a very specific in terms of a problem, in terms of having a sensor which tracks fuel, and which at the end of the day converts into a business problem, which is in terms of the pilferages, and hence potentially improves the visibility, also improves the operating expenses, or reduces operating expenses and improves the profitability, and which is the largest expense item. So how do you design your sensors which integrates, which communicates all these data points to a central technology, which is one set of question I have from a technology standpoint. But the other question is, how do you quantify the business impact? Because I think while all of these are attractive problems, are these problems large enough? What is the potential impact on the clients and the consumer? Maybe if you can illustrate that, that would be very helpful.
So I'll get past the technology piece. I think it's pretty straightforward. We use a technology which is called capacitive sensing. It is an aviation technology. All aircrafts are equipped with capacitive sensors. And what Omnicom has done is that they've actually translated that product into an automotive grade product. This sensor reads the volume of fuel inside a tank with high accuracy of plus minus 0.8%, and then it communicates that data point through onboard GPS and navigation devices back. So what the customer actually gets is a timestamp, location stamp, and fuel volume stamp of the equipment at any point in time, of the asset at any point in time. So having said that, the specific point about how do you quantify and how do you monetize this, the math is pretty simple. An average truck runs about 400 kilometers a day. An average truck consumes approximately 100 liters of diesel a day. Okay, and an average driver pilfers about 10% of diesel a day. Okay, and this is not. This is pretty prevalent, right? We are talking of something like 10 liters of diesel a day, representing $600 times 20 days. It's about 12,000 rupees of diesel. So that represents significant volume of fuel that gets lost. Now, of course, we have attacked the lowest hanging problem first, which is the problem of pilferage. And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about pilferage because it just sets a bad tone in the whole thing. But that is the biggest monster in the room, right? There are problems other than this. For example, one of our clients said they want to know carbon dioxide footprint of their logistics vehicles because a certain customer of theirs wants to start mapping this. Another problem that people come up is, of course, how do you optimize fuel consumption by linking or correlating these, with the actual driving behavior, which is available again through a lot of onboard diagnostics, right? So there are a set of problems to be solved, but the biggest one is, of course, pilferage. And clearly, what we do is that we actually provide platforms with which we are able to demonstrate to a customer on a daily and a monthly and a yearly basis the quantum of savings that they can get.
Sure.
Savings is one part of the problem, culture is the other, which we'll talk about.
Sure. So it is what you are saying is, at the end of the day, this is the largest operating expense item, and you are trying to solve that problem. Although people may not like to discuss it, it's become in some sense industry practice, but that's what you're trying to solve. And as you mentioned, there would be several use cases across the industry. So I think I want to ask, maybe get Navneet in on this point, because you did mention that there are 500,000 refers, which are out there, containers which are out there in the field. When you have sensors, and any time that we talk about the sensors, I mean, we have all seen the projections that there will be some 50 billion internet connected devices and sensors, by 2020. So how do you operate at such a scale, right? And you said that it took almost 3 years for you to even get that rollout done. Can you just explain us and walk through the process of, anytime you talk about the sensor, whether it is agricultural sensors, whether it is, fuel sensors, we are talking about not in hundreds, but we are talking in thousands, in some cases in millions as well. How do you operate at such a large scale?
Yeah, I think the starting point is the business case, and for a company of our scale and network of vessels, the business case was quite visible for a long time. We just didn't have the wherewithal or the bandwidth to do something about it, and once that was addressed several years back, then we embarked upon this fairly large exercise to get each of our containers, linked with a sensor. And we, like I said, about 250,000 reefers, but about a couple of million overall containers. So that whole exercise was fairly large and cumbersome, because you got to do it while these containers are in action around the world. You can't stop your business, so you have to do it meticulously and over a period of time. And then you have to start collecting. The next step was to make sure that you collect this data back. So equipping our vessels that on which these containers ride with satellites, and then collecting the data back. And then again, imagine for a old economy business like ours to leverage. Now suddenly you have a big data problem, and what do you do with that? It's great to collect this data, but harnessing billions of records and making sense of them. And even after you make sense of them, how do you operationalize actions around them was the next big step. So getting teams stood up in our center in Copenhagen and then Chennai, as I talked about, that actually monitor the data from these sensors and then do something about it, which is connect back to the vessels and have somebody go. So for example, if a reefer has a power supply that's come off because of a storm or bad weather, we get to know that immediately, and then somebody can go actually plug the power supply back or do something else about it, or and that's hugely valuable. I also mentioned about the benefits associated with the maintenance of these containers. There's a whole lot of effort that goes in before ships sail off, and the cycle time associated with that can be cut down dramatically. There's preventive maintenance that can be done as well, which is very valuable. You can cut down claims significantly. So imagine you're shipping bananas or onions around the world, and you land and they've all gone bad. You end up subject to a lot of damage and loss of revenue. How do you manage that proactively? So the potential use cases are tremendous. Beyond the reefers, if you look at just connecting your whole suite of machines or assets that are riding all over the world. Ships themselves are assets, containers on them are assets. We have inland vehicles, trucks on which the containers ride. We have empty containers I talked about, that once you take something from one part of the world to the other, now you suddenly have empty containers. What do you do with those? How do you optimize that? So the potential set of problems that can be solved once you have visibility to your assets and connectivity are tremendous, and I think we're just beginning to go after those in a more systematic manner. So scale is of course very much there, but it's again having the wherewithal, having the mindset, having the operationalization of every element of this process that I spoke about. That is critical to creating value, because if you don't do the last step here, all the cool technology doesn't create value.
Sure. So what you mentioned is a fairly long journey in terms of getting to the business case, to the value realization, and what you're saying is it's a process, and you have to meticulously follow through that to actually get the business results as well. I think just one point that you also mentioned is the big data, and in terms of the scale, when you are talking about 500,000 refers out there, you're talking about billions of data points which come into picture as well, and that's where again I want to get you in, Nishit, because you also mentioned that logistics for you, although you didn't understand that historically, but for you it is a mathematical or an algorithmic problem, and for you data is extremely critical, right? So how, what kind of data are you capturing? How are you managing a big data set, just like Navneet is also managing, and potentially how are you even trying to monetize that, right? Because you sit with a lot of data,
knowing, for example, how much time it would take to deliver a particular grocery order for me or for anyone in the room. So how are you trying to monetize the data as well? If you can give us some perspectives there.
So I'll address the first part and the second linked. So always a, these days practically nobody uses the term data. Everybody always says big data, right? And I assure you, by the way, like most of that big data problem can be solved in an iPhone. Like people underestimate what computers can do today. But another parameter and where IoT plays the most key role, more than big data, for industrial applications, right? When you're basing a decision on it, which will have significant financial implications, right? So, for example, if Merce decides to route along a certain port or does not, right? So, what becomes very, very important is the quality of data, right? And I think that has been the most significant change over the last 10 years in the entire IoT space, right? It is not that a light sensor was not there in 2007, right? And this is like, I think 2008, no, 7 or 8, like I was in my last year of school and first year of college. I used to have an RFID implant in my below my finger hair, right? And it was a smart, like, and it was connected through a parallel, like that time USB was not that popular, it's that long back. And like when I used to come back from school, it used to play a song on Winamp. That time Winamp was a meter, I don't know how many, but yeah, right? I have a similar setup today in my room, it's just wireless, like that's the key difference. But what is a big problem is the robustness of the entire setup, right? Ask any large scale IoT deploy, like servicing them becomes an even more thing, right? And as a country, we need to be, like, again, I'm making a generalization, but here we need to be super watchful, because as a country, we have a history of glorifying this term known as jugaad, right? Like there was that one paragraph in one HPR article, and we just took the jugaad word from there and glorified it. And jugaad is the single biggest enemy of IoT, right? Because see what happens when humans versus computers process the data, right? There is a thing, it's called like the problem of poisonous apple, right? So if I have a bag of apples and one of them is poisonous now, and I don't know which one, then I can't eat the entire bag, right? So if I can't trust my data that the IoT is bringing up, so for example, as a route optimization and tracking company, we collect a lot of location data, accelerometer data, fuel data, temperature data, that for cold chain operations, right? Now for example, cold chain, one of the places where cold chain data is used is that if I can prove 98% of my shipments were moved within the 3 bands of chill zone and refrigerated, like what my SLA was, I can significantly lower my insurance cost. This happens in India, this is not an American count, right? But if I don't trust my IoT sensors, which is giving me a temperature, and they can't be audited, or they are not reliable, or I'm not getting the data back in time in case of location data, then all of it becomes useless, right? Today, your basic compute is very, very powerful, and 99% of the time your problem is not just the amount of data, is it like the quality of data and can you trust it? And as a matter of fact, a huge amount of data, like when all these image recognition systems and number plate recognition systems and geocoding systems which convert address to lat long, they are effectively all just fighting human inconsistencies, right? So a lot of good amount of software tech goes in improving the quality of data before you use it. Now, second point that you asked, that how do we monetize some of this data? So one of the big problems in India, as say compared to Singapore or Tokyo, is that given an address, how do you get to a lat long, right? Some of it is our infrastructure problem, some of it is our problem also, because when we give our address on Amazon, we say so and so gully and then behind HDFC Mandir and HDFC Bank ATM, and that is we are good, right? If we feel creative, we also say come to the green door under the Hanuman Mandir and give a call at this number. Right. So now if you can't convert this into a latitude, longitude, all your IoT, computers, everything goes to fail, right? Because it's your analog to digital converter. Like if you can't convert speech to text first, then you can't do anything with that text, right? So for as a routing company, it was a very important problem to us. So we used to use a lot of external databases, like we buy enterprise licenses from Google and all, and still converting it becomes difficult. And also in India, it's not structured, like you don't have location streets, right? So over the past 2.5 years, over several tens of millions of unique GPS points, we have built our own systems where, given an address, we will say with a high confidence degree and a high coverage degree, detect a locality for you. And now we are selling geocoding as a service, and one of our biggest competitors there in India is Google. So when you, for example, in an Uber search box, type that, and you type and it recognizes that's a Google API. So we sell competing APIs. Myntra is one of our largest large-scale customers on that.
Understood. So that's a great example of monetizing data as well. So Anish, you also deal with a set of customers who are very demanding customers. I mean, retailers, as you can imagine, right, are on one hand, very savvy businessmen, who may not be enabled right, but they make the right business decisions, right? So at the end of the day, when all of this, when you apply the technology, you get the sensor, you operate at a scale, you get big data in, you create a service. Do they value? I mean, I think the bigger question is, do they value improved turnaround times? Do they value improved, service delivery times as well, right? I mean, how do you provide a service to a consumer who is very demanding, and how do you, because that's a last mile, last leg of the entire distribution chain. What do they value, and how do you convince them to, pay for service?
So Malav, when we began,
you can answer that broadly speaking as well. I mean, this
Sure.
is one example which I picked up. But for example, I know even consumers, like industrial consumers, on a year-on-year basis, they want to, drive down the transportation costs, right? Because that's the only KPI which they are valuing, not necessarily the turnaround times and the service levels and all the nice parameters that you sort of provide to them. They see it's nice to have, but will they really pay value for the service that you deliver to them as well?
so we have a slightly contrarian take to this, okay? And while we deeply respect the business acumen of every single traditional retailer out there, our hypothesis is that fundamentally the business of retail or the business of distribution is a efficiency oblique a logistics problem, okay? And allow me to explain that. Some of the key challenges in the retail distribution ecosystem are around very high sales and distribution spends on account of high channel margins, right? Some of the biggest challenge areas are inventory forecasting for a manufacturer, inventory obsolescence on account of wrong forecasting. There is excessive amount of inefficient credit in the channel. And why is all of this happening? That's primarily because nobody's really looked at it with the viewpoint that this is a logistics problem. When you have a country which has 15 million retailers, it is virtually impossible to deliver to them on demand. And hence, traditionally, what manufacturers have done is that they came up with this whole logic of beat-based delivery patterns, that I will deliver to this retailer on this particular day of the week, right? But the moment you begin doing that, right, what is happening is that you are losing all control over predictability of demand, because lesser number of transactions only means lesser ability to forecast inventory. Lesser frequencies of delivery means more requirement of credit and working capital in the system, because now the retailer needs to hold inventory for 15 days, right? For no fault of his, except for the fact that the supplier can deliver to him only once a week, right? So fundamentally, if you look at it, the key challenges to do with inventory, the key challenge to do with margins are on account of the fact that the entire logistics puzzle has not been solved. And it has not been solved primarily because nobody has attempted to solve the efficiency part of the logistics. Everybody has gone ahead and built out their standalone distribution infrastructure without being able to leverage on all these things. Coming to your point about what the retailers value, right? In a consumer commerce scenario, to my mind, when somebody delivers to you on time, it's delight, right? But in a scenario like ours, it is hygiene, right? So the fact that we are the only player in this space which has the capability to deliver with predictive slots to a retailer within 24 hours is not just delight. it is something to an extent where you are actually solving the most meaningful problem in his entire operation cycle, right? So you get held by the cuff of your collar virtually a lot of times when you end up missing this timeline. What is a delight for the retailer is to be able to give him the flexibility to receive inventory from multiple suppliers all together at a particular designated point in time of the day. And I think that is what we have been able to create, and hence we have the kind of deep engagement that we have with the retailers. But just to reiterate, I don't think it's a question of delight, it's not a question of experience, it's business hygiene. And fundamentally, the business of retail distribution is about logistics and creating efficiencies there.
Great, great. So I think what you are clearly saying is logistics can be a differentiator, and it can really make a meaningful difference to an underserved segment, which is the retailers today. And in that, and if you're able to enable that with technology, then you are clearly able to create the business case, for you, for the customer, and for the entire business as well.
Absolutely, because let's look at it this way: we are a country of 1.2 billion people out there, but fact of the matter is there are only 500 million people who are connected to the internet. Okay, right. Fact of the matter is I don't think there are more than 25 million people out there who are buying anything online, right? The country's business runs on the pillars, on the strength of these 15 million retailers out there. It makes that much more sense to go ahead and solve problems for these guys, which in turn is going to benefit so many more consumers. Because while e-commerce platforms might be able to offer us the convenience of being able to order online and receive the product in 7 to 21 days, you just can't beat the neighborhood retailer who can deliver to you within a few hours. But you need to make him also that much more efficient to be able to do that.
Absolutely, got it. No, I think this is very, very insightful, and I'd just like to, and we heard, all the use cases, all the benefits, and also the process of, getting the entire IoT program in place. My other question is, this entire logistics and transportation is we all believe that it's a very challenging industry and a challenging business problem to solve. I mean, given so many low-hanging fruit, so many inefficiencies in the system. I'd like to get a perspective, and maybe I'll throw it open to all of you. Whoever wants to answer first can go first. But what are the key challenges that you see, from a on-the-ground implementation, of an IoT project? Whether it is, in your case, maybe putting a fuel sensor, or in your case, potentially putting a, temperature sensors on reefers, or measuring and monitoring data, or the quality of data, right? Or providing the end customer delight. But what are the challenges that you have seen on the ground, which are very specific, could be very unique to India as well, may not be, and we have a lot of unique set of problems ourselves in the way, the country operates. So maybe anyone would want to go first and maybe talk about that.
I don't have a lot, but the key problem in any automation solution is that, so, be it on fuel, containers, routing, distribution, that your buyer and user are two different sets of people, right? He will buy my product, right? But the guy loading the container will use my product. And given its automation, by default, either you're taking away his job or you're taking away his control, right? They don't like that, right? So stakeholder development at that. So that's change.
For us, what we've discovered when we're trying to develop a new category, adoption and usage of data that comes out of it is a big problem, because my sets of customers, my sets of end users are highly disaggregated. Okay, truck owner average fleet size is between 5 and 7 in India. There are like a couple of 100,000 businesses which are of that size, and their ability to use data, and precisely the point you made, how do you actually get them to show the benefit of this, is one big problem. The second issue, and which is I think the second issue in that order, is the fact that the quality of data that's available, i.e. the quality of devices that deliver the data, is pretty substandard. And the quality of user experience, user interfaces and deployment scenarios is very, very widely varying. And I think that's a big open space for somebody to come and actually disrupt. You're selling to very disaggregate customers who don't know how to use this data. They all love to have savings of 10 and 15 and 20%, but they're also selling through people who are selling a poor quality device, who are doing a bad job of implementation. So in the end, there's a lot of frustration with even people who've boldly attempted to get into that space. And I think that slows down the whole process.
Yeah, maybe just one follow-up question for you, Mohit, as well. And as Nishit mentioned, automation practically means that you are taking away, the control or taking away the job. Your product goes into trucks, for example, and the truck drivers, may and for them, especially if they are incentivized on fuel pilferage, for example, in a traditional manner.
They have a positive incentive to make more money.
Right. So how do you deal with the change management, right? Because like for example, independent truck drivers may not like track and tracing, which imposes a certain SLAs on them. I mean, just any other.
I'll give you
maybe an examples.
I'll give you an example of how some of these changes happen by taking use case of a particular client of ours. This client is actually a over dimension carrier. In this logistics industry, there is this sub segment called ODC, over dimension carriers. They represent. This is an industry which is growing at almost 30 to 40% per annum. They're carrying these huge 80-ton, 90-ton cargo, blades of windmills and boilers and those types of things. And they use these trucks which are like multi-axle trucks. They have like 20 axles. These trucks are fuel guzzlers, right? They might, on an empty truck, they might give a mileage of 1 kilometer per liter. On a full truckload, they might go down to as low as 0.5. And then they can't go on every route, right? So if there's a culvert which breaks down somewhere, there might be a deviation of 200 kilometers, right? So the cargo is variable, the route is variable, the load, the cargo and the payload is variable, and so the trucks are owned by them. So these are not market trucks where they just pay per kilometer, and so they are their own valuable, precious trucks, and they have drivers who are very precious. Again, they pay them upwards of 30,000-40,000 rupees salaries. Okay, unheard of in the industry. But these guys have big problems because a single route of this might be a month-long trip of 2,000 kilometers. And this particular case, our customer was actually, filling in 3,200 liters of diesel in a full month for a single trip of 2,000 kilometers. He monitored using our sensors, and after 3 months, he discovered that the driver was actually overcharging him by 600 liters of diesel in that single trip, right? Now that's about almost 15% of the total cost of the trip, right? Now this is a classic example where he found the problem, right? He discovered the problem, but he has still not made the change because he said that the whole driver incentive system, there is a disincentive to be honest. Right? You make money off me. You are an entrepreneur who makes money off me. So if I cut the cord, I have problems. But then he says now the conversations have changed. Earlier, this guy used to be always breathing down and saying that I am leaving your job because I don't get well paid. Now I'm able to demonstrate that I pay you twice as much as what your salary is. He says that's phase 1 of the change. Phase 2 is when I will actually start to tighten the screws.
Sure. Want to add anything to that?
In regards to challenges, I think we spoke about a couple of them already. Quality of data is absolutely critical because when you're deploying at scale, if there's a cry wolf situation, bad data, and then you lose confidence very quickly in large corporations because you suddenly done a whole lot of change management, process changes, all of that to bring people to align to this massive program. And now if you have bad data and you make 5 trips to the container and it's incorrect data, the next time there's no incentive to go and people will try to bypass the process. So I think quality of data becomes very important. Investing in feedback loops is very, very important to make sure that you're learning from the journey. It's not a once and done process. And continuing to improve the process, the data, the value creation, as I mentioned earlier, is very important. So it's no different than any large implementation of anything else, but it's given the maturity of the products, I think the quality becomes very, very important.
So I'll add on the last mile perspective to this. I think as far as last mile logistics is concerned, while there is clearly a lot of technology enhancement happening in areas such as asset tracking, fleet management, I think there is very little work really happening on inventory tracking, right? As a result of which, I'm sure must have happened to a lot of us. We would have ordered a phone and received a soap inside the phone box, largely to do with the fact that there is very little inventory tracking capability on the ground as of today. The other challenge area is perhaps reverse logistics. So today you look at any of the e-commerce operations or even any distribution operations, 12 to 15% returns are more or less the norm, right? But in absence of inventory tracking technology, you really do not know what you are bringing back when you're bringing it back, right? And logistics businesses, distribution businesses are thin margin businesses. Every single product misplaced is a hit to the margin. Somewhere, I think what is compounding the fact is that there is very little standardization of sensing technology. So while there are people working on technologies based on wide area networks, there are people working on technologies which are to do with near field communication, there isn't really a lot of standardization happening. So today all of us use mobile phones, but what really helps is that today everybody's moved on to USB based chargers. Similarly, uniformity of sensing technology, I think, will end up playing a big role.
I agree. I think that's maybe that could be one of the last question for the group, and just from a startup community perspective as well. And then we saw there are a lot of IoT startups, which are part of the TIE and IESA network. Maybe if you can talk about, and then it's open for all of you, is what opportunities exist for startups to solve those problems, and what can be enabled. Again, at an association level, at an industry level, potentially standards is one of the things that we just talked about. How do we ensure that all the pieces together, whether it is, the sensor data talking to application enablement platform, application development platform, big data, analytics, process automation, all of that coming together, what are the other areas of enablement which would be required? So maybe, what opportunities exist for startups and what can be enabled for at an industry level from an.
Let me answer it from a corporate partnership perspective, and then others can chime in. I think there's a lot of corporate accelerators, startup partnerships out there. In my previous world at Target, which is a retailer, I ran a startup accelerator, and what we found works is finding common problems to work on and making sure that the startups, if they're flexible enough to invest time to go deep and build high quality products, there's a lot of value creation. Of course, great value creation for the corporates themselves because it allows them access to great talent at a very different acquisition scale. So I would encourage startups to find those opportunities to connect with corporates, understand business problems at depth, look to solve them in terms of prototypes, and then be willing to go deep in that space. Because when you can solve a large problem at scale like the ones I was talking about, it's worth the investment for both parties. I would just throw that out.
Great. No, thanks, Navneet. So I'll just like to maybe summarize, what we went over, and clearly, we did talk about whole host of use cases which are out there, in terms of solving, large scale problems that are existing in IoT, in transportation and logistics, whether it is fuel, whether it is sensing temperature, whether it is, getting large big data problems or solving the problems of the end consumers. We also talked about, the potential that you don't have to be a technologist, to solve or you don't have to be from the industry to solve the problem of the industry, and that's something that's, right, visible in front of you. I think there are processes that we need to follow, right from going to business case to value realization, especially when you have to operate at a scale. And it is a continuous learning process. I think that's something that, again, Navneet, mentioned that quite a bit. And all of these technologies really need to come together in terms of solving the problem and creating a service, for the end consumer. So I think with this, I will, I'll please give a big round of applause for all the participants over here. One sort of short announcement I have is that this room needs to be the partition needs to be broken for the next session. So I'm unfortunately unable to take any questions, because of the paucity of time. But feel free to interact with each of the participants. They will be around for a little while. In case if you have any questions, we can take that in our one-on-one conversations. But once again, thank you so much for making these conversations very interesting. Appreciate, gentlemen.
So can I please have the mementos to be presented to the speakers, please? Thank you. We would also like to have a Hyperloop talk for 5 minutes, so if you could just be in the room for another 10 minutes or so. We would like to just get started when we finish off with this. Thank you. So Malay, I would ask you to hand it over to the 4 speakers. Thank you. All right, and I'll do the honors for a memento for Malay. Thank you. Thank you.